Here we are finally at the end of the Gilded Age, the last of our series, the Populists, which is going to be an organization of farmers. So let's go ahead and get into it and get this unit over with. Alright, so to start with, this whole series of notes right here is about farmers, and so we've got to talk about what is the life of a farmer like. We've talked about it in general back in a previous set of notes on the West, but for real, what was their life like? Well, socially, out in the Great Plains, a lot of farmers were isolated. Remember, you are talking about a time period where local travel is very difficult. You're having to walk, you're having to ride a horse and buggy, and so they're socially isolated. Even systems of communication we take for granted, like the telephone. They didn't have the money to invest in a telephone in their home, so they're very socially isolated. Politically, they were being ignored by the major parties. So you're ignored by the parties. You're ignored because you don't have the option for social interaction. And economically, farmers suffer financial burdens and financial hardships. Two of the things that are going on for farmers. Through the Gilded Age, their costs increased. In order to remain competitive, in order to grow crops on your farm, you had to invest in the new equipment. The problem is that the cost of that equipment and the cost of the fertilizer and the cost of the seed and everything is going up year over year. When costs increase, when your money cannot buy as much, that is called inflation. So that's one economic problem farmers have. The other economic problem that farmers have is as they grow more crops, as everyone grows more crops, the price they are able to get at market decreases because the market is being flooded with an overabundant supply. During this time period, the population of the United States is growing. The financial problem farmers have is the supply of food is growing faster than the population. So the market is oversaturated. When that happens, when there's too much supply, prices go down. When prices go down, this is called deflation. So farmers are facing increased costs, but they're able to get less and less per unit that they produce. This is going to cause farmers to start to organize. Just like our workers will, farmers will organize. One of the early groups, we're not going over all the groups, just some of them. One of the early groups is called the Grange, or sometimes they're called the Patrons of Husbandry. It really began as a social organization in the 1860s. They organized dances, different educational activities, things that they felt would bring farmers together. The educational activities, they would invite people from the agricultural and mechanical universities that had been established to come in and teach better farming techniques. But the whole overall purpose of it was to bring farmers together for social interaction. Farmers' wives actually were big supporters of the Grange for this reason. They also started to form these things that are called cooperatives. Cooperatives were economic organizations. They were basically alliances between farmers in a given area. And what those farmers would do is, since they're in the same area, they're probably all growing the same crop. And what they would do is they would agree to charge the same price for their crops. This was going to be a way for them to stop that deflation so that they could keep the price of their goods higher, so that they could make more money, so that they could afford to buy the new equipment, so they could afford to pay their debts. The problem with competition is, from a business standpoint, is it keeps prices low, because as the consumer, I'm going to go to whoever offers me the lowest price. If you find out you are losing business because your prices are too high, your first thought is going to be to lower prices. If the farmers are working together, that will eliminate that, as everyone agrees they're going to charge the same price. The farmers also become politically active as they start realizing that the different parties have been ignoring them, and so they start getting involved in politics and start kind of trying to demand that the political parties do something for them. On the state level, they will see some success. There are certain things in the Midwest and the South that are passed called Granger laws. Those are laws that were designed to help farmers. In the case of Munn versus Illinois, which we've seen previously, that was a Granger law. Wabash versus Illinois, that was that lawsuit was filed over a Granger law. Things that the states are going to do to help farmers in, obviously, agricultural states. Now, unfortunately, the Grange fails. And it has more to do with the failure of the cooperatives that were designed to promote that economic stability. The problem with the cooperatives is they are too small. Okay? You might have a county-wide cooperative. Well, the problem with that is you go from the individual farmers all over the place competing against each other to just the cooperatives that are in the counties next door competing against each other. So you're just swapping out one set of competition for another. And ultimately what happens is the cooperatives start lowering prices so that they can compete against each other. And so the failure of the economic alliance leads to the failure of the whole organization. That's going to be quickly replaced, though. It was quickly replaced by something called the Farmers Alliance. It is very similar to the Grange, especially in terms of social activities, getting people together for those social things. Economically, the Farmers Alliance is going to be a little bit different. They're going to set up something called an exchange. Instead of cooperatives, they're going to try exchanges. Exchanges are basically cooperatives. If you understand what a cooperative is, then you've got it. The difference is an exchange is on a state-wide scale. So, for example, in Texas, the Grange had organized different county-wide cooperatives. So we might have the Bowie County Cotton Cooperative. But the Farmers Alliance is going to set up the Texas Cotton Exchange. So it's all the cotton farmers in the entire state agreeing to charge the same price. Some of those are successful. Not all of them, because when you had two different states producing the same crop, then obviously the exchanges would get into competition. But because they are so large and so widespread, take the Texas Cotton Exchange, for example. It actually helped raise cotton prices in Texas, because by the time you get to the Gilded Age, it didn't matter how much cotton you bought and where it was produced. At some point, as a business, you were going to have to come to Texas. And you were going to have to buy Texas cotton. And the Texas Cotton Exchange would demand a high price, and if you didn't want to pay it, the Texas Cotton Exchange would look at you and say, okay, go find someplace else where you can buy cotton. Because you can't. You have to come to us. Okay. Politically, they are going to, again, get involved in politics. Unfortunately, because of the different sectional differences, the Farmers Alliance never really could get a full political headway. Okay? Basically, you have northern farmers who have decided they're going to vote Republican, and you have southern farmers who are going to vote Democrat, and the two parties, even though they're very similar, still have some diverse goals. One of them being tariffs. The northern Republicans supported high tariffs, and so those northern farmers are supporting tariffs, whether they know it or not, whereas the southerners are supporting the Democrats, who are supporting low tariffs. Alright, so these farmers from all these different groups, not just the Grange or the Farmers Alliance, but there are lots of different groups out there. They're going to start to get together, and they're going to meet together and start to organize and start to get on the same page politically. In 1890, a group of them meet in a place called Ocala, that's in Florida, and they write this thing called the Ocala Platform. A platform is, usually we use that term when we're talking about the political parties, the Republican platform or the Democratic platform. What do the parties want to do when they are elected and gain political power? Same thing here, only what this is what the farmers want the government to do for them. And so they write up this platform and say, these are the things we want the government to do. These are the main things from that platform. This is not all of them, just the main things. Number one, they wanted the government to end tariffs. Farmers feel usually that tariffs on things coming from other countries prompt those other countries to put tariffs on farm products that we're trying to sell over there. So high tariffs in the United States actually hurt farmers. They also wanted the government to take over and own the large utilities, especially the railroads, telephones, and telegraphs. These are the large monopolies that they felt really were taking advantage of them. Okay? Think of it, in a rural area, even though you may have 5 or so different railroad companies, it doesn't make financial sense for each railroad to compete into the rural area. And so what would end up happening is one railroad would build out in the rural area, and that gave them a monopoly in that location. And so they could then overcharge the people that lived there. Farmers felt that if the government owned these things, they would treat everyone equally and fairly. The third thing here on our list, the farmers wanted the government to institute something called a graduated income tax. A graduated income tax is where if you have a higher income, you pay a higher tax rate. This does not mean the more you make, the more you pay. That's not what it means. What it means is the more you make, the more you earn, the higher percentage you pay. So someone who is very wealthy may pay, say, 50% in taxes, whereas someone who is down on the bottom end would pay maybe only 5% in taxes. The farmers felt this was fair. They're looking at their financial situation saying, look, we have to pay taxes, and we just don't have that much money. We're barely scraping by. We're not able to pay a whole lot in taxes. Meanwhile, you've got John D. Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and all these other guys that are making money hand over fist. They can afford a higher tax burden. And we're fixing to ask government to do a lot of things. Government's going to need money to do that. They also wanted the direct election of senators by the people of a state. This is still a time when the 2 senators from every state are chosen by the state legislatures. We, the people, went to vote, and we elected the people to run the state government. Those people then turned around and picked the 2 senators they would send to Washington. And what farmers saw happening was the politicians were people that had money. They tended to come from the urban areas. And so when the urban-centered people got elected to state government, they chose 2 senators who had urban interests at heart. And so the farmers were sitting around saying, wait a minute, who is representing our interests in the Senate? The biggest issue that the farmers had was what they called free silver. This is not the government going out and giving everyone silver. What this was backing the nation's paper money, backing the nation's currency by silver and gold. Okay, right now, at this point in time, the nation's currency was backed by gold. That means basically if the country has $100 million worth of gold saved up somewhere, it can only print $100 million in currency. Because you're going to take that to the bank and you would trade it in for a specific amount of gold. What the farmers are looking for is to also, for the government to go out and buy silver and then turn around and say, okay, you can either trade in your money for gold or silver. This would increase the nation's money supply. This would increase the amount of currency in circulation, which would then promote inflation, which is something that the farmers have wanted. Inflation, so that they can more easily pay their debts and hopefully make more profit on the sale end. Now, they're going to take this Ocala platform and they're going to shop it around to the two major political parties. The Republicans will flat out reject it because the Republicans have decided they are pro-business, and none of this really is pro-business. The Democrats kind of go back and forth about whether or not they're going to support the issue, and ultimately the farmers get fed up, and they will form the Populist Party. And so the Populist Party, sometimes you will see it called the People's Party. The word populist means of the people. Okay? Not everybody liked the Populist Party. Some people thought it was a little ridiculous, and if you'll look over here at the cartoon, you'll see, all right, who do these people think it is? Well, they think it's the old Greenback Party. Look, they did support women's rights. It's the Knights of Labor Party, the Grange Party. Look, even socialists, free silver, prohibition, anarchists. Okay? And so this particular cartoon is disparaging the Populists, but they organized in 1892, and they nominated a guy named James Weaver for president. He would run. He didn't pick up any electoral votes, but he did pick up over 1 million popular votes, which is really good for a first-time party to get over 1 million votes. They ran successful candidates in Midwestern and Southern states on the congressional, local, or state level. Okay? And what this meant for them was, as a party, they were potentially a viable third party in the 1896 elections. Okay? Yes, they did not win the presidency. Yes, they did not win any electoral votes, but they showed significant political potential. And so people have to start taking the Populists seriously heading into those elections. Now, between 1892 and 1896, there's going to be some changes. Some things are going to go down. In the South, for one, Southern Democrats, seeing this surge in political support for the Populists, feel threatened. Okay? They saw their political power potentially slipping away. The Populists might take political control of the South. As any political party, you don't want the opposition to win. The Populists in the South also, one of their campaign pledges was the Populists were going to promise equal treatment and protection of civil rights for African Americans. The Populist Party, when it gets together, they were trying to unite all farmers. And they wanted to protect the rights of African American farmers because it's one thing for African American farmers to support you in spirit only. It would be even better if they were guaranteed the right to vote and could vote for you. So that's one of the reasons why they're trying to guarantee that. Now, the Democrats in the South, what they're going to do is start turning more to the Jim Crow policies and the Jim Crow laws. 1895, Plessy versus Ferguson decision is released, and so as they start continuing to disenfranchise African Americans and start continuing to segregate African Americans, the Democrats in the South will promise the white farmers that as long as you continue to vote Democrat, they would protect you from the economic competition of African American farmers. And so the Populists, even though they kind of get their foot in the door in the South, they're never able to get further than that because the Democrats are going to turn to those segregationist policies and through white supremacy and racism and segregation encourage white voters to continue voting Democrat and discourage black voters from going to the polls. So heading into the election of 1896, the Populists decided rather than nominate somebody for president, they were going to hang back a little bit. Because they kind of knew what was going to happen. The two major political parties were each going to nominate someone who supported business interests, who supported the status quo, whatever, and then the Populists were going to come in and say, look, there's no difference between these two candidates. Here's our platform. It is of the people. Vote for us. And so that's what they're going to do. They're going to hang back and see what happens. Well, the Republicans nominate a guy named William McKinley. And McKinley supports business interests. He is right there where the Populists thought he would be. The Republicans support protective tariffs, and more importantly, they supported the gold standard. Okay? Here we have the Republican campaign poster of McKinley standing on the gold coin, saying this is how we get prosperity and commerce and civilization, through the gold standard, currency backed by gold alone. And so the Populists see this, and they're not surprised, and this is what they expected, so okay. And then come the Democrats. The Democrats end up nominating a guy named William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan kind of stole the show at the Democratic convention. The Democrats were having trouble deciding who they were going to nominate. You had several different nomination ballots, and a young William Jennings Bryan gave up to give a speech called the Cross of Gold speech. William Jennings Bryan was just a guy who can electrify a crowd with his words and with his speeches, and so he gets up in front of the Democratic convention and he starts his speech, and everybody's paying attention and everybody is getting fired up, and he finishes his speech by saying, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns, and you shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." What he did in that speech was he supported labor unions, and he supported the idea of free silver. If we back it by gold, we're going to crucify our economy. So we must back our currency by silver. This is the main issue. And so now suddenly the Democrats have stolen, and notice I put that in quotation marks, they've stolen the Populists' main issue. And so as the Populist Party, you now had a difficult decision to make. Okay? Because here in the campaign, you've got one guy that clearly supports the gold standard and another guy that supports your issues. And so if you run your own candidate, you run the risk of splitting the vote and ensuring that McKinley wins. So instead, the Populists will support their principles, and they will say, never mind, don't vote Populist, let's vote for William Jennings Bryan. And so they support the Democratic nominee. Bryan is going to go out, he's going to give over 600 speeches in 14 weeks, crisscrossing the country, barnstorming, giving these speeches all over the place. This is at a time when that was not done. The candidate was seen as being above all that. Okay, campaigning like that, that's where you get into mudslinging and whatever else. You send your people to go do that. You send your people to go assassinate the character of the other person. You don't do it. You're better than that. Bryan gets down in there. He gets down there in the muck, and he starts doing it. McKinley, on the other hand, is going to campaign the way presidential candidates did back in the day with his, what they call the front porch campaign. He doesn't leave Ohio. He stays at his home, and if you wanted him to speak to your group, hop on a train, head out to his hometown, Canton, Ohio, and he would come out on the front porch and speak to you. His wife would make cookies. So we go through this campaign in 1896, and we get to November, and the people go to the polls and vote, and the results are McKinley wins. You see how close it is, 271 to 176 electoral votes. About 600 or so thousand votes, popular votes, separate the two candidates. So McKinley wins. And so the Republicans will maintain control of the White House. For the Populists, this also means that the Populist Party is going to die out. Okay? Once they supported the Democrat, it was kind of the kiss of death of their party. You know, when you say, well, who's your political party running? Well, we're not running a candidate. Well, then what good are you to me? But the reason we talk about the Populists is because they are important. I mean, they forced the issue on that free silver thing. But if you go back to the Ocala Platform and the things that the Populist Party called for, you can look at those things, and those are issues that were going to be politically important over the next 20 years. So ultimately, even though their party died, their issues remained alive. And that's why they're important, because they bring those things up that are going to have to be addressed in the coming decades. And with that, we are done with the Gilded Age. Thank you for hanging with me through this series. I hope that it gave you a better understanding and a clearer understanding of what went on during the late 1800s.